Welcome Life Science learners to another lesson. Trust that you guys are well and excited about today. In our lesson today, we're going to be focusing on nutrient cycles. We're going to pay special attention to the water and the oxygen cycles. As a heads up, there are 4 different cycles that we look at: the water cycle, the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. So why are these referred to as nutrients? Let's try and understand the context of where these nutrients are. So carbon, oxygen, water, and nitrogen are the essential organic compounds that we need, are the essential elements that we need for organic compounds. And let's try and understand that. So these are essential elements that we need for most of our biological processes. And hence, it's important that we understand what are the events that happen that ensures that the levels of these fluctuate or return back to normal in the earth. So it's important that we recognize that a cycle is a series of events that constantly occurs. And so let's look at that concept as we unpack some important terminology before we get into the concepts of looking at the different cycles. So unpacking terminology is crucial, and I always mention that this is something that you must do. We're then going to spend some time looking at an overview of the nutrient cycle with relation to what atmospheric gases are. So it's important that, again, the context of this is all in ecology. If we look at ecology, it's a study of the relationship between plants and animals and with each other and their non-living environment. And that's important for us to be able to understand, is that the abiotic factors are factors that influence our nutrient cycle. So we're going to need to understand how these cycles influence life, or the biotic factors. When we talk of the term ecosystems, we're again referring to a specific area in which the abiotic and the biotic components interact with each other and are interdependent. And this is important in that we're looking at how the biotic factors and the abiotic factors collectively function with each other and with their environment. Guys, it's important that we mention the term abiotic, and this often comes up when we're studying ecology. Again, it's the non-living components of an ecosystem that make up the abiotic components. And these would include soil, climate, temperature, sunlight, and water. And we're going to spend some time looking at water today. We're going to look at the biotic components and how they influence the ecosystem. And so these would be the living components in an ecosystem. Guys, the next component is the biosphere. Again, this is part of the earth where humans and other organisms are able to live and interact with each other. As a recollection of what we've done in the past, the biosphere refers to the 3 components that make up Earth. And this would refer to the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. And when we look at these, we're going to pay special emphasis today on the atmosphere and how the oxygen cycle occurs. The nutrient cycle, as I mentioned, refers to a repeated pathway of a particular nutrient or element from the environment through one or more organism and back to the environment. So again, when we talk of cycle, it refers to the movement in a continuous process. And in this case, we're going to look at nutrients and how they are cycled through the environment, either through the living components and the non-living components. And hence, we refer to them as the nutrient cycle. As I mentioned in our lesson, we're going to focus on the oxygen cycle. This is the cycle whereby the atmospheric oxygen is converted to carbon dioxide in animals during respiration and regenerated by green plants in photosynthesis. So a major component of this lesson would be the oxygen cycle. And we've got to look at what processes produce the oxygen, what processes use up the oxygen, and how that balance is maintained in the atmosphere. We also will spend some time looking at the water cycle. Again, the water cycle is also called the hydrologic cycle. Again, the word hydro referring to water, and the processes that are involved in the continuous circulation of water in the earth and atmospheric systems. So the water cycle again would refer to how water is processed in different forms and returns back to the water cycle. Again, let's unpack the nutrient cycle in detail. So the biotic components in an ecosystem depend on the abiotic components. As we mentioned, the abiotic components form the essential nutrients that biotic components need. When we refer to the nutrient cycle, it's important that we understand that the nutrients need to return back into the biotic components so that these can support the living components in an ecosystem. Nutrients are obtained from the environment and are used by living organisms to grow, reproduce, and stay healthy. And that's important that we recognize that this nutrient supply needs to constantly be replenished. The most important elements that are required by organisms are oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. And these are known as your macronutrients. So again, in the context of living organisms producing organic compounds, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen are the essential macronutrients that are needed for these important processes. We also need to recognize that there are some trace elements, and these are elements that are required in significantly smaller quantities, and these include magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur, iron, and a few others. And these are important micronutrients that are important in the production of some of our organic compounds. Again, the term micro referring to required in small quantities. These are important elements as they produce organic compounds such as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and other important biological compounds. And without these, it would be seen that we would not be able to sustain the life forms on Earth. The nutrient cycle makes them available for reuse over and over again. Nutrients are cycled through the bodies of organisms and the ecosystem. Water is also required by organisms, and this is an important component of life. It's important that before we look at the oxygen cycle that we unpack what the atmosphere is made up of. When we look at atmospheric gases, we know that it is made up of different types of gases. We have oxygen, which makes up 21% of the atmosphere, carbon dioxide 0.04%, and nitrogen a significantly large percent of 78%, with the other gases making up approximately 1% of that. We know that oxygen is important for respiration, for photosynthesis, and for filtering out sunlight, so that protects organisms from the harmful and strong sun rays. Again, if we look at the combination of the different gases, we see that the nitrogen is a significant component. It's important that we recognize that these ratios of substances or gases that make up the total atmosphere remain approximately the same. Of recent, in the last 100 years, we've noticed that there's been an increase in the carbon dioxide levels, and we will talk about that in a little while. And so this is important that we understand that the concentration of these gases have remained relatively stable for a long period of time. All living organisms except anaerobic bacteria need oxygen, and we see that they need it for an important process called cellular respiration. However, we know that the green plants require carbon dioxide for a process of photosynthesis. A substance like nitrogen in the air is important for all organisms in the process of protein synthesis. Guys, as we wrap this segment up, we've looked at what the significance of nutrients are in the production of organic compounds. You guys have been a good audience. Have a little break, and I'll see you in a bit.